guys, Miss Jessica here, and welcome to another book tasting. Today, I've stopped by the shops and picked up a nice full bag of freshly baked, still warm books for us to share. So let's hurry up inside and start tasting. See you there. All right, guys, so I made it in and I am nice and toasty warm and I'm ready to fill my tummy with some of our yummy books that we've got. So, crunchy. Our first book that we're going to go ahead and sample is My Teacher Flunked the Planet. Well, all right. Wasn't that pretty interesting? Aliens in disguise, saving the world, crazy weird things like slugs that are called poots. I'm definitely ready to read chapter 1. How about you guys? Okay, let's go ahead and dig in. Chapter 1, Nicka Nicka Flexum Poospa. Broxholm's orange eyes were glowing. The leathery lime green skin of his face was stretched tight in a look that I could not interpret. The view screen behind him showed an image of the Earth floating in the dark glory of space. Broxholm pointed to a red button that glowed more brightly than his eyes. "This is it," he said. "The button." My throat was dry. What would happen if you pushed it? His lipless mouth pulled back in something like a smile, revealing round, purplish teeth. Nothing, at least not now. It takes a complex series of secret commands to activate it. "And if that series of commands is used?" asked Susan Simmons, who was standing beside me. Broxholm turned and gazed at the image of Earth. "Stardust," he whispered. "Whoa," said Duncan Doole. "Major bummer." Another being entered the chamber. Turning, I saw Kreplum, the alien who had fried Duncan's brain and made him super smart. Her lavender hair, thick as worms, was writhing around her head. "The council is ready to see us," she said, gesturing over her shoulder with her long, three-pronged nose. I swallowed. The Interplanetary Council was trying to decide how to handle what they called the Earth question, which was basically, what do we do with the only species on 10,000 planets that is bright enough to figure out space travel, yet dumb enough to have wars? That species was human beings, of course, and they didn't much care for any of the aliens' current plans, which I had explained to Susan and Duncan earlier that night when I told them the story of my experiences since I had gone into space with Broxholm. "If we start with the least nasty option and work up," I had said, "then Plan A calls for the aliens to leave us alone for now." "That's not so bad," Susan had said. "Unfortunately, most of the aliens who favor it do so because they figure if they leave us alone, we'll destroy ourselves before we make it into space. That way the problem is solved and they don't have to feel guilty." "That stinks," cried Duncan. "Agreed. Now, the aliens who support what we'll call Plan B would like to take over the planet." Susan's eyes had widened. "An alien invasion? Just like we feared from the beginning?" "Not quite. This group wants to fix things. They would cure diseases, stop wars, end poverty, that kind of thing." Duncan had blinked in surprise. "Well, that sounds great!" "It would be, except they'll only do it if we give them total control of the planet." Duncan had started to ask why. Then he nodded. "They're afraid once they give us their technology, we'll use it against them." "You've got it," I said, reminding myself not to be surprised when Duncan figured things out. "So what's the third option?" Susan had asked. Plan C. Restrict us to our own solar system, either by sabotaging our science so we never develop faster than light travel, or by setting up a military blockade. Since I have always believed it is our destiny to go to the stars, I hated that idea more than I can tell you. Most aliens think that wouldn't work. I had continued. They figure sooner or later we'd get out anyway, so we have Plan D. D for destruction, you might say. The group supporting this wants to blow us up now, before we can get into space and really make trouble. They believe if we make it out of the solar system, the final cost in lives and destruction will be far greater than if they simply wipe us out today. They look at us the way we would look at a group of monkeys that accidentally learned to make atomic bombs. Interesting, but too dangerous to be allowed to live. The bad news was, the aliens seemed to be leaning toward Plan D. The good news was, they were going to let us try to change their minds. We followed Kreblum to the wall. She had her pet Poot, which was also named Poot, for reasons I didn't understand, riding on her shoulder. Poot was sort of an alien slug that oozed and changed shape. I had noticed that Duncan seemed to be very fond of it. I guess it was fond of Duncan too, since when it noticed him, it raised a blob of itself and cried, "Poot!" Kreblin stopped in front of a large circle. Mounted in the wall next to it were 12 rows of multicolored marbles. She punched 6 of the marbles. The circle turned blue. This was what the aliens call a transcendental elevator. It could transport beings from one place to another instantly, which was just as well, since the New Jersey, that was the spaceship we were on, had thousands of miles of corridors. I followed Kremblin through the circle and into the meeting chamber of the Interplanetary Council. Susan gasped when she came in behind me. I didn't blame her. Each of the 8 beings on the council came from a different world. Seeing them all together was plenty strange. Actually, what we were seeing were holographic projections of the council members. The council members themselves remained on their own worlds. However, the 3-dimensional images were so realistic, I rarely thought about that. First to speak was an alien who looked like a pile of red seaweed with thick green stalks growing out of the top. It made a series of popping, bubbling sounds, then wiggled the squishy-looking pods that dangled from the end of each stalk to indicate that what it had said was a question. I understood the gesture because the aliens had installed a universal translator in my brain, and it was interpreted whatever any of them said. In turn, I was to translate their sounds and gestures for Susan and Duncan. I turned to Susan. Her hair, usually blonde, had a green tint from the odd light of the chamber. Susan is very pretty by Earth standards, but I had seen so many versions of beauty since I joined the aliens, I didn't think about that much now. He wants to know if you understand why you are here, I said. I do, she replied, speaking directly to red seaweed. Peter told me all about it. And do you accept the task? Susan took so long to answer that I began to fear that the alien might get upset. I understood. It was a big job, but even so, I gave her a nudge. I accept, she said, more loudly than I expected. And you, Duncan Dougal? Asked an alien who looked more like a shadow than anything real and solid. It spoke by changing the way light reflected from its body. Duncan's round face was serious. It was hard for me to imagine a kid who had bullied his way through grade school, a kid who appeared to have all the sensitivity of a brick, being responsible for the survival of the planet. But I was prejudiced. Duncan had been picking on me, and everyone else in our class, for so long that it was so hard to remember how different he was now that the aliens had unleashed his natural intelligence by frying his brain. When I translated the question, Duncan nodded. I accept, he said. And you, Krepta? Asked a tall, sea-green alien. I hesitated for only a moment. After all, the mission had been partly my idea. I accept, I said. Though I meant to say it proudly, my voice came out sounding small and scared. Next to speak was a purple alien whose long tentacles stretched across a silvery rack. A nozzle mounted above the rack sprayed lavender mist over the tentacles, keeping them slick and shiny. Broxholm Narks Erksen Zaxgradix, it asked. That mouthful of syllables represented Broxholm's full name, including his family group, Narks Erksen, and his planet, Scrotus. Broxholm was standing behind me. I turned to look at him. Putting a hand on my shoulder, he wrinkled his high green forehead, his way of signaling agreement. The final member of our party to be sworn in was Kreblum. Her thick lavender hair was rippling with so many conflicting emotions, she looked as if she had a colony of confused worms climbing out of her head. I began to wonder if she had changed her mind, but after a moment she closed her third eye, the one in the middle of her forehead, and said, "I accept." The council didn't ask us to swear on a holy book or anything. The aliens expect that if you say you'll do something, you'll do it. Only, I wasn't entirely sure what we had just said we would do. Basically, they had given us the last 3 weeks of October to put together a report on the state of Earth and its people. But what was supposed to be in that report? How could we make them think better of us? At the moment, the aliens viewed us the way you and I look at flu germs. Insignificant, yet nasty and dangerous. Or worse, I think they considered all of humanity as a sickness threatening to overtake the galaxy if something wasn't done about us. The newcomers will need translators, said a large bat-like alien who dangled from the ceiling in a sling. Its voice, which I had not heard before, was like nails scraping over concrete. I could feel it in my spine. After Susan and Duncan took their hands away from their ears, I translated the alien's screech. Duncan looked puzzled. Why do we need translators to go back to Earth? Because your planet, which has yet to figure out the benefit of true communication, has hundreds of different languages, screeched the bat-like alien. The other aliens made sounds of sorrow and disapproval at our backward ways. When I explained bat things answers, Duncan's eyes lit up. You mean these translators will let us understand any language on Earth? He cried. They would hardly be universal translators if they didn't, said Red Seaweed, adding a gesture that meant something like, "Is water wet?" Wow, said Duncan. This is going to be great. Suddenly his smile faded. The blood drained from his face. Wait a minute, he said. Are you going to do brain surgery on me? In my opinion, brain surgery on the old Duncan would have been a good idea. He'd had nothing to lose, and it might have improved things. But now that I had been inside his brain a couple of times, as a result of being hooked into some alien communication machines, I understood why he was so upset. Since the aliens had fried the thing, it was pretty amazing. I wouldn't have wanted to take a chance with it either. I was trying to decide whether to tease Duncan or reassure him when a wave of dizziness swept over me. My own brain felt as if it had come loose inside my skull and began to spin. "Nika nika flexum puspa," I cried. As I was wondering where the words had come from, everything went black, and I collapsed in a heap on the floor. Well, that was chapter 1, and a lot is going on in there. It basically is telling us that he's already in space, he's meeting with aliens, and they're discussing the fate of Earth, basically. And what we found out in our book trailer, that he's only in 7th grade. So he's probably around the same age as you guys, maybe a little bit older or maybe a little bit younger, kind of depends. But yeah, can you guys imagine if you were put forth a council of aliens and were told that you need to help save the humanity? It's pretty crazy. It's pretty wild for a 7th grader. And what I do need to tell you about this book is it's actually part of a series. And if you could tell already in chapter 1, that there were a lot of things that had already previously happened. Well, those actually happened in the book before this, and that's okay. You don't have to read the other books in order to understand what's going on in here. It's actually been around for a very long time. It just keeps getting rewritten, which is really cool. And I think you guys would really enjoy it. It's My Teacher Flunked the Planet. So, we enjoyed that one. And now we have our last little bite, and it's Stella by Starlight. So let's go ahead. Well, all right, welcome back. What did we think? It was pretty intense, pretty serious. This is actually a very realistic and compelling story that is really moving. And if you like our history, especially the Black American history, even if you're just interested in it and want to know more, this book is really a eye-opener in that. It follows these two kids through the story of their life from back in the day and their experiences with racism and actually the Ku Klux Klan. So I will say we're going to go ahead and get started on chapter 1. It's pretty short, but there's a lot going in there, a lot of emotions. So let's see what you guys think. Chapter 1, Flames Across the Water. 9 robed figures dressed all in white, heads covered with softly pointed hoods. Against the black of night, a single wooden cross blazed. Reflections of peppery red flames shimmered across the otherwise dark surface of Kilkenny Pond. 2 children crouched behind the low-hanging branches of a hulking oak tree on the other side of the pond, watched the flickers of scarlet in the distance in fearful silence. Dressed only in nightshirts, Stella Mills and her brother Jojo shivered in the midnight October chill. Stella yanked the boy close, dry leaves crunching beneath his bare feet. "Shh," she whispered, holding him tightly. "Don't move." Jojo squirmed out of her grasp. "It was me that saw him first," he protested. "You'd still be asleep if I hadn't come and got you, so let me see." Stella covered her brother's lips with her fingers to quiet him. Even though her toes were numb with cold, and she knew they needed to get out of there, she could not take her eyes from the horror glimmering toward them from across the pond. "Do you know what would happen if they saw us?" she whispered, shifting her stinging feet, the crushing of dry leaves seeming far too loud. Jojo pressed himself closer to her in answer. Besides the traitorous leaves, Stella could hear a pair of bullfrogs barumping to each other, but nothing. Not a single human voice from across the pond. She could, however, smell the charring pine, tinged with... what? She sniffed deeper. It was acrid and harsh. Heresy! A trail of gray smoke snaked up to the sky, merging with the clouds. "Who are they?" Jojo whispered, stealing another glance. "The Klan." Just saying those words made Stella's lips quiver. The Ku Klux Klan. Here. Here! What are they doing? Practicing, I think. For what? Stella paused and smoothed his bushy hair, trying to figure out the best way to answer. Jojo was only 8. "Nothing good," she said at last. A horse whinnied in the distance. It sounded nervous. And there, in the shadows of the trees across the pond, Stella could make out half a dozen of them. The flames must be scaring them too, she thought. The horses began to stamp and snort as the fire flared. Stella inched forward, trying to get a better look. One of the harnesses seemed to sparkle in the darkness. Or was it just a stray ember from the flames? The men in the white hoods were now all raising their arms to the sky, and they cried out as one, but their exact words were muffled by cloth and wind. "Jojo, we've got to get out of here," she whispered, now edging backward. "Should we tell Mama and Papa?" Jojo asked. Stella did not answer her brother. Instead, she caught his hand in her tightest grip and ran. So that's the beginning of our book, Stella by Starlight. And like I said, it's pretty intense. There's some good emotion in there. These kids who've never seen it before, they've only heard of the Ku Klux Klan, has apparently now just made it into their town. And if you guys want to find out what happens to Stella and Jojo and the rest of the characters in this book and how they get through such a time, you come into the library here, and me and my friends will help you find Stella by Starlight. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed our tasty treats today. And coming up next week, we'll have some more. So I'll see you all real soon. Happy reading. Bye.